Hey guys, this is Tara. I wanted to come to you guys today and talk about something that is so incredibly important, especially with what's been going on recently in the world around us, and that is this topic of intergenerational trauma. I saw a quote this morning by Stephanie Wagner, I believe, or Steffi Wagner, and it said that trauma passes through families until it gets to somebody who's ready to feel it. Okay, um, you know, it, it's it's pretty intuitive for us to be able to look at our family, look at other individuals, and pick out certain dynamics and patterns that seem to have been passed down from generation to generation, right? You can the way you're raised. I mean, it's pretty intuitive to understand how the way you were raised. The influence your parents, caregivers, family, those who really have a big role in developing your mindset, your perceptions of the world, really building your understanding, the blueprint of how things work is done in early childhood. And between the environmental components of perception, there's also the genetic component. So it's pretty intuitive to think about how certain behaviors, certain things are passed down from generation to generation, right? I know, for example, alcoholism, right? So alcoholism is something that has been in my family for generations, right? And that has both the environmental influence component to it, but it also has the genetic component to it, right? And that is a big part of it. I think the environmental component is something that most people can intuitively and conceptually grasp. I mean, it's not that difficult to look within maybe your family or just situations that you're aware of and be able to identify that, right? The part that I want to address a little bit more in depth is the genetic component, because that is a huge part of it. And I loved what I loved about that quote was how it talks about trauma passing down through families until somebody's ready to feel it, right? Well, part of this genetic component is that when there are situations or there is some trauma, there's something that has happened in the past in your family line. It causes a physiological response in the body that then, depending on the degree of severity, can actually be imprinted, and it can be imprinted onto the DNA. Okay, I call these scars on the DNA. This is stuff that has actually been scientifically researched. They did studies. I know there were some studies done with Vietnam War vets, but there was one study I read a while back about that really stuck with me, that talked about Holocaust survivors, and how individuals who actually survived what is just it gives me chills thinking about the horrors of what these people endured and experienced. And what they did was they looked at the impact mentally, psychologically, and how that really how that impacted them on many levels. And then they ended up looking at the children, grandchildren, so 1-2 generations removed from these survivors. And what they found was something that was very interesting. They found that the trauma, that the actual physiologically measurable, right, biologically, physiologically measurable changes, and the way that those changes and the impact of that event, the way it actually created and was translated into behavior, into actions, and started to be seen, the effects of it were seen in people's lives. It was more pronounced in the generations that were removed than it even was in the generation of those who actually went through it and survived it. Okay, and I mean, think about that for a second, right? What that says is that intergenerational trauma is very much something that can be passed down genetically through the DNA. I'm sure you're familiar with the field of genetics just in general, but there is a subfield within genetics called epigenetics. And what epigenetics looks like or what it describes the process of certain genes being turned on I gave the example earlier about in my own family, alcoholism, how it runs in my own family. And it is an epigenetically expressed gene, right? So you can have, and this is like the things you're predisposed for, right? So if you think about it in terms of genetics and epigenetic, you'd think about it like a predisposition, right? So alcoholism was prominent in my family, and so I had a genetic predisposition for it, right? So I had the genes for it, but it took that with a combination of environmental factors that triggered, and it switches on the gene, right? And when the gene switches on, once the environmental stimulus, once something happens that then switches that gene on, it then becomes expressed, and it literally transforms the physiological, your biological and the physiological. There's physiological changes, measurable physiological changes. It rewires the structure of your brain. It causes, with alcoholism and addiction, it causes, the reward circuitry overactive. It plays a big part. And, I think it is so incredibly interesting and just really important to come to a better understanding of how incredibly impactful intergenerational trauma can be, especially during this time right now. We have a generation with the events that have gone on, horrific things that have gone on recently that have affected, specific certain communities, the African American community, and a lot of the talk you hear about it, the pain, that the intensity of emotion that is being expressed and released. It's very, very real. It's very, very real. And I know I have talked to and interacted with individuals who look at it and are just like, think it is just so overblown, just the amount of emotion. But the truth of the matter is, if you think about what I talked about in regards to the Holocaust survivors, it was the generations, a couple of generations removed, who felt the biggest impact of that. They experienced physiological, biological, an impact of it that was even more pronounced than the survivors. So if you look at it in terms of that and the things that are going on right now, I think that it goes a long way in bringing understanding to these responses, right? But the thing about it is, and that's why, that's what I loved about this quote, trauma passes down through families until someone's ready to feel it, right? So we're looking at this generation. There's just a lot of not just in specific communities, but there's a lot of stuff, emotion, and just raw, powerful, loud emotion, and just flowing out of so many people. And we, the overall opinion is that this is just some bad thing. This is some horrible thing, right? But what if, right? What if this generation is the generation that is called to feel it, right? Because the thing about it is, these predisposition, these certain traumas, these scars, whatever you want to call them, that are passed down genetically through DNA, through generations, the way in which these things are healed is when somebody stops, when somebody does something different, right? I know in my case, I was a raging alcoholic by the time I was 19. Brought me to the brink of death by the age 20. I'll do a video on all of that at some point, just to kind of share the experience and what I learned through it. But the big thing is, because I dealt with that, it was just crazy. My life was in turmoil through my teen years up until then. But because it got like that, because it impacted me so severely, I ended up being the one who addressed it and overcame it at an early age. And what that means is, I broke the cycle. I broke the cycle because I was able to overcome it. And overcome it, right? When I got sober, I about a year and a half after I went to rehab, I stayed in rehab for a long time because I was that serious about not going back. It was my life. I literally was at the brink of death. after that, I've never had any type of issue or craving. When I say I overcame it, right? And so now I'm having children. My brother and sister, I have a brother and sister who, they partied just as much as I did, but they did not. They never, that switch never flipped. So it was never something that became pronounced in their life. So what we have now is a first generation in our family where children are growing up in a different environment where there's no drink. You see what I'm saying? They're not being exposed to the same things. They don't have an alcoholic parent they have to deal with. They don't have the trauma of that. The dysfunction that comes along with that. That can greatly impact children growing up, and can greatly affect them in their later years. So this is the first generation where that is not happening, right? And so it's when you think about it in terms like that, like it's what is happening right now is literally people are being called, they're being trusted with healing these scars. And I think that what is missing right now is the same thing that was missing, in my life up until the point where I had that revelation. Like, what if you're a cycle breaker, right? What if everything you're experiencing, what if everything that's happening right now is because you are called to heal? You are called to feel it, and you are called to heal it, right? We know that everyone's feeling. It has just gotten to the point, it's so intense, there's so much going on, but the healing part of it, right? And I know for me, when I came into better understanding of how this all works and the purpose of it, right? It transformed my entire perception of everything I had gone through. Does that make sense? Like, I no longer looked at myself as like this crazy fuck up, bad person, right? I started making sense of it, and I realized I was who my bloodline was waiting for, right? I was the person, I was the one my bloodline has been waiting for. I'm the cycle breaker. And I think that I just think that is so empowering. And so what I wanted to, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, but I just wanted to put that out there, right? I wanted to bring a new perception into y'all's understanding, or just into your perception, into your perceptual awareness, right? To consider, right? Because when I look at the situation and all the stuff that's been going on, I can see that. I can see what's happening. I can empathize because I know it personally and intimately in my own life. And so when I look on it, my perception of it, my response to it, my response to how people are feeling the loudness of it, it's very different. It's very different, right? It doesn't mean I have to agree with some of the, maybe the violent actions, or, some of the ways in which it has become destructive to, physically destructive to certain areas. Like, I don't have to agree with it to be able to say that I have an understanding of the intensity of the intensity of the emotions that can be triggered, and not having an understanding of what the hell it is, right? When you have an emotional response, when you have something like that, and when you're feeling that chaos and you cannot explain it or articulate it, you cannot find the source. Like, it throws you, like, that is what your brain seeks to do. It's like, right? If you can't do that, if you can't find understanding, like, what is going on, what tends to happen is subconsciously you then go and create situations, right? You go and do something, or in my case, when I was an alcoholic, I'd pick little fights. I'd pick fights so that I could get it out and get the anger and the frustration I was feeling out. I'd pick fights with people. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but when I looked back at what I was doing, I can easily see that now, right? So that's what we tend to do. We tend to have to then find something to attach and make sense of the chaos and intensity of emotion going on within us, right? And the thing about it is, though, even when we do that, right, it's not the most healthy, obviously not the most healthy way to deal with that. But until you know better, like me, even that serves a purpose, though, right? Because you end up seeing, right, when you are upset and all your emotion is rooted in injustice done to someone you love or somebody in your community, who you identify with so deeply, when an injustice and violence is done to them, and your intensity of emotion behind it, right, when that ends up causing you to go out and behave in ways that really reflect the same violence and the same injustice, what that ends up doing is it ends up showing you a reflection of what it is that's going on in you, right? So when we can't identify what's behind the chaos in us or the intensity of emotion, and we start to project that on the surface of reality around us, right? At that point, then it starts being mirrored back to us, right? It starts being mirrored back to us. And it gets more intense, and it gets the consequences, it gets uglier and uglier until it comes to that point where it gets your attention. Something happens that literally consequences. There's a consequence that happens that forces you to stop and be like, whoa, you're forced to stop and take a deeper look, right? And I feel like it's just so interesting, the timing of everything, right? I want you guys to understand and hear what's really happening. Think about the timing of everything. So we have all this violence, we have all this stuff going on at the beginning of the year, and then after kind of stuff starts to settle, we're given this opportunity where people are being forced, due to the virus, people are now being forced to sit with themselves in their house, right? People are being forced to stay inside. And it's like you can't run from yourself when you're alone, and you can't go anywhere, right? You can't run from yourself, right? It makes it more difficult to then create situations around you to attach it to, right? And so that is what, that is what's really going on. That's what's really happening. These people, all this stuff that's going on right now, these are warriors, people called. This generation, especially in the African American community, generation being called, trusted, has been empowered, has everything in them necessary to heal, to be cycle breakers, and to heal the trauma, heal the scars on that DNA. Because what happens is when you do that, just like I've done with alcoholism, and now my children are the first generation removed from it, and then their generation and their children. So it's not just something. It's not something that just affected me. It didn't just affect my children. It affected my children's children, right? And it doesn't just affect my children. It affects all the people that they come across later on in life, because they are not having to carry that weight, the unresolved trauma and wounds, or the chaos inside of them. All the things that come along with being in a really tough situation in your childhood, or something where, you have a parent that is, an alcoholic. It can rock little minds. And because of that, because of what I went through early, and then also just the work that I've done, the transformation I have made, and being able to sow that into their lives, that knowledge and wisdom to their lives, and model it in my own life. Now, it's not just my children and their children and their children, it's the people they touch in their life, right? They are now influencing and modeling, and they are transforming the people in their sphere of influence. So, one of the things that I know people, I know everyone's had this thought, or even if you don't, consciously think it, you think we're living in a world with how many people, like 7 billion people in the world. I'm just one person. I'm just one person, how big of an impact can I be? I mean, literally, when you think about what could I possibly do sitting in my house by myself during quarantine or during whatever, right? What can I do to change? And the crazy part about it is, what I've learned through my own experience is that the most important thing anybody can do to change, the most powerful way to bring about lasting and positive transformation in the world is to go within and to heal all those things, to transform yourself. And it touches generations from you on, not just in your bloodline, but in the sphere of all the people the people in your bloodline are going to influence, right? If you think about how powerful and just to be trusted with that, right? It's an honor. It's an honor. And I feel like if we can just get a bit of a perspective shift here, if we can start to reframe this and see it in a different light and see it for what it truly is, I feel like the floodgates would open. The floodgates would open. And, regardless of whether people are consciously wanting to do this, the whole universe is conspiring to make this happen. And we are literally sitting on the threshold of what I consider to be the greatest awakening in all mankind, in the history of mankind. And it's amazing to be a part of it, right? So, I just kind of wanted to jump on here and share that. I wanted to give you a new perspective to consider. Each individual, right? It's the greatest thing you can do. It's the greatest thing you can do is getting to know yourself and healing. It's so empowering. It's so empowering, right? There's no reason to be scared of the dark parts of you. There's no reason to be ashamed, right? Right? Everybody's got stuff. You don't have to run. You can't run, but you don't have to run away from, the parts of you that maybe scare you or that are a little bit dark. You don't have to hide those chapters that you don't want to read out loud, right? It's within all of that. It's within the darkness that all the power lies, right? Because when you can go in and understand what it's for, its purpose for, when you can go in and find that, you become unstoppable. You become empowered. You become unfuckable with, is what I say. But yeah, anywho, I wanted to make sure this one stayed a little bit shorter than my last couple videos, so I'm going to stop there. I'll probably go a little bit more in depth, maybe break some stuff down more technically, bring the scientific elements into it in some other videos, do short videos to break it up a little bit here in the near future. But thanks for hanging with me. If you have any questions or want to make a comment, feel free to drop it below in the comment box. You can also check me out, Reintegrative Wellness, Facebook and Instagram, or you can check out my website, www.reintegrativewellness.com. I think my biggest goal is, and my purpose is to talk about my story, is to share my story and my experience, but it is to spark within you and light a fire that is literally going to engulf the entire world, right? Once one gets lit, then two, right? One little match in a matchbox sets the whole match. You only need to spark one in the matchbook. If there's a box of matches, you only need to spark one and the rest of them will burn, right? That is the power. That is the power in you. That's the power in knowing you. That's the power in discovering who you are and going in, right? Your darkness is nothing to fear. It's not there to fear, right? A lot of what you're going through, it may not even be something from your life, right? You in your DNA, you are carrying generations of memories, generations of trauma, generations of successes, generations of everything. And when you hear people saying, you know, my ancestors are speaking to me, my ancestors are protecting me, that is exactly what that means. They do that through your DNA, right? The imprint of everybody that has come before you, it's there. The memory of everybody that has come before, it lives within you, right? And the switching on of these genes, the epigenetic expression of these genes that are dormant, it's them letting you know it's time. It's time. You are who your bloodline has been waiting for, right? See it that way and understand that you have everything in you to change it, to transform, and to break the cycle, right? Cycle breakers. It's what we're here to do. It's what this generation is here to do. And I hope you eventually come to the place where you hold it in the high regard and with the utmost honor that I do. I've seen it in my own life. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So anyways, like I said, check out my website, check out the social media, and then drop any comments or questions below. Let me know if there's anything you want to talk about, you'd like to hear me talk about. I will do what I can to throw something together. Y'all have a brilliant remainder of your day. All right, thanks guys.